Dear Esther is really interesting. The original walking simulator in a game that's story is basically entirely left up to the player's discretion. This is really kind of pushing the bounds of what an achievement hunt is, but I've really wanted to play this game for a long time. There aren't a whole lot of difficult achievements in this game, only a few missable things and a couple trips through the story, but hey, it's my channel, we're playing it anyway. Also, apologies for the slightly sick voice. The game seems to begin with us reading out a letter beginning with Dear Esther. Things make a lot of sense. We seem to be on some sort of island that we've been left on for quite some time, and we're going to spend the majority of this game walking around once again. This game has an interesting start. One of the first things we see is a little building that we can poke our head in and look around. And an interesting thing about this game is the props that are around the world actually kind of randomly generate between the different playthroughs. So there's a good chance you'll get different things from trip through to trip through, but one thing that stays the same are these weird chemical formulas that we see on the walls scattered around from time to time. This game also loves to give you a choice of different paths that you can take. One to the right, one to the left. You walk up either one and you'll get to the same place for the most part, but for somebody like me, it ends in me backtracking and walking through both of them quite a few times. Throughout this story, our character also references a book written by a guy named Donnelly who was writing about this island. Apparently some hermit came here and was some great holy spirit, but everybody else that's been here have just been like sheep herders and things like that. We take a small detour through the mountainside and we see a little hole in the river with a blinking light in it. I assume this might be like Morse code or something, but we'll have to go down there and investigate to see for sure what's going on. But before we can make our way over to that actual cutout in the hillside, we need to continue making our way down the beach where we find some more of these interesting drawings on the sand, this one happening to be the golden ratio. The beach section seems to actually dead end. We see something that I thought at the time was a landmine, but I think is actually a tire, but clearly this isn't the way to go either way. So a consequence of not really knowing anything about games before I start them is I didn't know what type of game this was. I reached the end of this cliff, didn't see anywhere else to go, so I decided to just swim out into the water. Now, this was not the solution. We eventually sink down to the bottom and we get a voice in our ear telling us to come back. But when we pop back up to land, we earn the achievement Sinad, maybe? Something like that. These have some funky names, but at least we've earned our first of 10 achievements. So that's clearly not the thing to do. We double back and find the secondary path upwards. I actually thought this is where the up path from before would have connected through after I hopped down, but it wasn't. So let's follow it now. As we begin walking along the cliffside, we get an interesting history lesson about some of these islands. When someone was dying or ill, the people that lived here would draw these white lines on the cliffside to alert passing by people not to come rescue them because something was seriously wrong. And we have done this ourselves because we have some sort of infection of the mind and the flesh that we don't want anybody to come rescue us for. So that's very interesting to learn. As we continue walking very slowly down into the valley, we get another passage from Donnelly's book telling us that the shepherds that lived here were very God-fearing people that all abandoned the island in 1776, which is very interesting considering some of the newer type things that we've seen around the island already. Our narrator also gives another letter to Esther which recounts him meeting with a man named Paul in his small house outside of Wolverhampton, which is interesting. This part seems completely disconnected from everything that we've heard so far, so I'm sure this will be pretty important at some point, right? As our narrator continues muttering about Paul and the hermit, we approach the cave that we saw previously, but we don't see anything in here that would have been blinking at us, which is very weird because I'm quite sure that I saw that when I was up above. This little cave is a dead end, but it does feature some drawings of some weird, like, tentacle-based creature type things, maybe the representation of the infection or something. With the cave sorted, we can only continue on forward where we come across some weird stone pillars and a chemistry textbook, so maybe that explains all of those different symbols we've been seeing. And after that cool observation, I proceed to take a couple steps too far down into the area that we've already explored, where we fall off the cliff and die, earning the achievement Stack and Armin, and we appear back up on top. In this area, we also happen to find a cracked urn that we zoom in on, and then the ashes blow up into our face. This made me very worried that this was a collectible that we have missed up until this point, but we're not going to double back, we'll just get them in the future, I guess. We continue to press onwards through the island, and eventually we earn the achievement Donnelly for finishing this first chapter of the game. And then we go directly into another speech, another letter to Esther, talking about how we've driven the stretch of the M5 between Exeter and Bristol over and over again trying to figure something out or find something, but we haven't been able to do it. Our narrator seems to have some sort of obsession that he just can't figure out the answer to, and maybe that's why he's ended up out on this island. Through every chapter of this game, the terrain changes quite a bit, and in this one, we walk out of the little cliff and immediately see some pretty large-looking boats crashed out on the shore that we'll need to go investigate. Once we're down there, we find that the ship's contents have a large number of smaller packages and then bigger crates that all seem to have been broken open. But weirdly enough, there don't seem to be any people, so maybe they're somewhere else on the island, or they managed to get rescued and this mess was just never cleaned up. There isn't a whole lot for us to do down by the boats though, so we continue on, and the next piece of dialogue we hear is huge for my interpretation of this story. As all of these letters have been to Esther, when we read "you have been rendered opaque by the car of a drunk," things begin to click into place about what we were trying to find on the M5. Even with that shocking development now fresh in our mind, we need to continue to persevere through the rest of the island as we approach this absolutely beautiful sidescape of this hill. Really, this is like a great shot. This might even be the thumbnail of this video because I haven't made it yet. I don't know. We learn that this house at the top of the hill we're approaching was constructed by a man named Jacobson who came here every summer in the hopes of securing a better life, but sadly it didn't work out. I'm kind of just thankful that this happened in the early 1700s, so all of those goats are a little old by now, and we probably won't have to deal with them on our trip through the island. Inside the house, we find that this seems to be where we've been staying the entire time we've been on the island. We also talk about how we plan on burning all of our things on our last morning here, so I guess we aren't planning on leaving the island today. Behind our little house, there is now a path down into the valley below, so we're heading back down towards another beach to continue on our journey. Continuing on, our narrator mentions how Donnelly was going insane as syphilis tore through his system like a drunk driver, which is a very interesting metaphor to use given our situation. But that also adds a little bit of doubt towards all of the things that Donnelly has actually written about this island. We take a slight detour down on the beach where we find VLC Media Player and the second of our urns. Now, we've only found one per level at this point, so I'm pretty confident it's only going to be one per level, but I guess we'll see when we get to the end. Back on the main beach, continuing towards the big cave, we get another huge reveal through text. Apparently we were climbing down the caves and fell and injured our leg. We are extremely infected, and there is only one way to proceed, it would seem. We are taking a bunch of the medical supplies that we looted from that boat that crashed and making one final ascent, it would seem. So maybe this is our last morning on the island. We take another quick glance down one of the many side paths of this game, and at the end we find that the ground is absolutely littered with tons and tons of copies of this same book over and over again. This was really weird. I thought that this was going to lead to a little bit more, but it isn't. This is it. After we reach the end of the beach, we continue on into the mouth of a very large looking cave, and suddenly things get very, very blue. Abba dee, abba die. We hop down into the huge mouth of this cave, of course, and we earn the achievement Jacobson for completing Chapter 2. Chapter 3 begins with us laying on our back looking up at the ceiling when we gain a little bit more consciousness and we can stand up and continue our way through the caves as we are quite deep in them at this point. The cave area is pretty interesting because we have all of these switches between the colors blue and green, and it really looks really great. I love the vibe of this cave. When we come to certain areas though, we seem to shrink down to move between them, and I'm thinking, wow, there must be some sort of perspective change magic thing going on with this game that hasn't been presented to us up to this point. And it took me an embarrassing amount of time to realize we were just crouching and uncrouching. With that embarrassing confession out of the way, we continue on into another one of these side caves. This is completely filled with stalags of both the mite and tite variety. This area also featured a thin layer of water between the center of the room and the outside of the room that we step into and go into a kind of blue-green screen. I sit here for a little while thinking that I'm either going to move into a new area or I'm going to get one of those comeback pop-ups again. And this time I actually didn't. The game just stayed like this. I had to completely quit out and go back to the menu and go back in and everything, and I don't know what happened here. This was like the only glitch I experienced with this game, but it was weird. So after a quick reload, we approach another absolutely beautiful giant chasm that we hop directly into and land in the pool of water below. No injuries, of course, and we continue moving forward. This game is a remaster, so obviously the graphics are going to be better than in the original game, and I hate to keep beating on it, but the way that this game just changes in this area specifically between the greens and the blues, everything just looks so good here. I really love this area. We do what seems to be a pretty dangerous trip around another big hole with some water pouring pretty quickly over the edge, and with our broken leg, I wouldn't be super happy about doing this, but of course we do it with no problems. Our narrator speaks about how pain is flowing through him like an underground sea, right as we come to one of these natural bridges underground that happens to move over kind of a flowing river type area. This game is so beautiful, just in the scenes that you see and the way everything is written. It is just so good. I'm normally a noted cave and water level hater in video games, but man, this area is just hitting. And on the bank of this underground river, we find our third urn. At this point, pretty confident that there's only going to be one per level. I explored every inch of this underground cave area right here, and I'll tell you, with how slow our character walks, it was pretty painful, honestly, especially not knowing what the correct path was. But down one of the directions, we find what appear to be some paper sailboats that have ended up washed up down here. Very weird. Not knowing what direction to go, I actually accidentally did the long climb up into the next area and then had to slowly backtrack my way back to look through the side areas of this little bridge section. And I mentioned it before, but man, the movement in this game is purposefully slow, but it's so slow. We enter a weird room with a bunch of kind of little crystal things poking out of the walls, and then our narrator hits us with another line about a drowned man's face reflecting the dead shepherd that's come to drunk drive us home. Another very beautiful line. And after our narrator hits us with that beautiful line, we proceed into what is kind of maybe the craziest section of this game. The walls in the ascent up out of the cave are absolutely covered in writing and diagrams, and ooh, this guy has really lost it, huh? Now we're left with one final pit for us to drop into. We try to skirt our way around it, but we accidentally fall directly in, and this time we don't wake up back in the cave, but we wake up on what seems to be the M5 highway. We continue to walk forward when we find what appears to be a hospital gurney laid out in the middle of the highway. Ooh, this is getting heavier, huh? We continue out onto the distance, and eventually we're back in the cave, where we can proceed to the final exit out in a hole that looks far too small, but we earn the achievement Esther for finishing Chapter 3 up. Chapter 4 begins with us emerging out of the mouth of the cave back to the outside world on the beach, where we see a gigantic moon poking out in front of us. And the moon definitely wasn't out when we went down, so we were down there for quite a while. As we continue out and begin looking around this new beach area, we find some photos of the accident surrounded by candles, which begs the question who lit those and how long have they been burning, but we really don't have too long to process that that thought as our narrator immediately begins thinking about the ramifications of burial in the ground versus cremation. Just some nice light thoughts for our stroll on the beach. We also find the medical supplies that I suppose we've used to keep ourselves moving up to this point. Also on the beach, we find our fourth and final urn to earn the achievement Tour. So glad that we didn't need to go back and find a bunch of those per level. Looking around at the night sky out on the pier and all of the things in the distance, we get lesson 1 for first day of video game school. We see a giant blinking tower in the distance, and we pretty much know where we're going to be headed. We do actually get a benefit for how much time we've spent exploring in this game though. As we're walking back along the beach, we earn achievement number 7, Man of the Rocks, for walking a total of 5,000 steps. In the final of the cliffside caves, we find some more remnants of the accident that we seem to have brought with us to the island, I suppose. You know, just traveling nice and light. Even further yet down the beach, we find our armada, where we have written all of our letters to Esther, folded them into ships, and set them out into the water. So that explains all of those ships that we saw down below earlier on in the game. We climb even further yet up the side of the mountain, and things are beginning to shift. Things are beginning to feel a lot more final as we make our final ascent up to the top of the island. Our narrator recounts the funeral process for Esther once more as we begin to speak about becoming infused with the very air. These are surely good things that you want to hear from somebody that has been out here all alone for so long. We continue further up towards the blinking light, even as the paths begin to become increasingly windy and much more dangerous, but we know where we need to end up. We take a brief pause from our climb as our narrator says he was not drunk, Esther, he was not drunk at all. I take this to mean that our narrator is kind of coming to terms with the fact that this was just an accident. The man that caused the crash was not at fault necessarily. He didn't mean to ruin our narrator's life, and things sometimes just happen without really being able to prevent it by anyone. We reach the bottom of the tower, and as we're climbing up, we see a mysterious, shadowy figure looking down on us. I kind of interpreted this to be the spirit of Esther waiting for us to come join her. And as we complete our journey to the top, we earn the achievement Sinad for triggering all of the voiceover points in the game. Once we reach the tower, the game becomes very on rails, presumably because they just want this to be a nice cinematic instead of us climbing all the way to the top of the tower. Now, interestingly enough, here our character refers to Esther as Esther Donnelly, so maybe this person that we've been reading the book about this whole time was Esther's father or grandfather or something like that, maybe. But we speak about how we have been drawn to this island and we have left as much for the others as we possibly could, but now someone else will have to return and write all about us to get our remembrance built in as well. We reach the top of the tower and we jump off. We begin crashing down towards the ground as this was obviously at this point kind of gonna go. We've had this infection and we've been making our final journey up to the top of the island. As we begin to fall, we really get the depth of how far we have come in this final section that we've been climbing through, but just as we're about to hit the ground, we turn into a bird. Our narrator has mentioned the seagulls a couple times at this point, but nothing super important it seemed like at the time. But at this point, it seems like the seagulls have finally come to nest in our bones like we guessed about, and we have become them and returned to the earth maybe? I don't know, this final section is really up to your interpretation. It feels kinda hopeful, but we definitely jumped, right? Unless maybe what we were seeing we couldn't really believe, which is definitely another option. As our bird form continues their flight off into the moon, we get into the credit sequence where we earn the achievement Paul, and now we have one more achievement remaining. So our final thing to take on is to replay the entire game in director's commentary mode. So let's go ahead and start. So Director's Commentary mode is definitely intended to be played through after you've already played the game once, where we get the 3 creators of the game talking about the process of creating the game. And it basically cuts out all of the actual story points. You don't really hear the narrator talking at all. And some people might complain about playing through this kinda slow-paced game a full second time, but I don't know about you, but back when DVDs were a thing and the creators and the main actors or whatever would create the director's commentary on that DVD menu, I always used to love listening to those, so this was really a treat for me. For example, just, to pick one of the many things that I listen to these people talk about through replaying this game, the white lines in the cliff are a real thing that they used to do on these islands. So that's just a really interesting thing to learn about history-wise, but there's also a lot of game development and music choice things that they talk about as well. I also learned through this playthrough that the spirit that I saw right at the end of the game the first time through is actually visible a couple more times throughout the story, and I was just completely oblivious to it with my search to kind of listen to everything. Even though I was enjoying the director's commentary, I was definitely very happy to finally have triggered all of them, earning the achievement Moloch ein Eilein, and we can say we have officially done everything there is to do in Dear Esther Landmark Edition. So how did we do? Dear Esther Landmark Edition took me about 3.5 hours to complete, which makes sense because we had to play through the game 2 entire times to get all of the achievements knocked out. This game was super interesting. Obviously, I didn't really get into the music at all, but the music was great. The actual story was a little confusing and hard to understand, but the idea of things kind of shifting from playthrough to playthrough and everybody being able to interpret their own ending to the game was very neat. Also, I learned that apparently on that gurney scene on the M5 through the director's commentary, there's also one that you can get that's like a car crash scene that would have been pretty cool to see, but I actually only saw the gurney scene both times, so I think I maybe just got unlucky with variants there. This game was also originally a Half-Life 2 mod, which I didn't know going in. I only learned that also through listening to the director's commentary, but I love playing these games that were mods for games and then years later got turned into their full own thing, like the Forgotten City that we've played previously on the channel. As the original walking sim, I mean maybe not the original walking sim, but the popularized walking sim, this game is definitely interesting for the history of the genre. As somebody that's played quite a few of these, I would recommend it, but it is very slow paced. Obviously, that was intended by the creators to really get you to absorb and think about the story as you're moving along, but it definitely is a slow-moving game all about absorbing the environment, so if that's not your thing, you might not enjoy this one as much. But even if you don't enjoy the game, I sure hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next week for the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to leave any of your thoughts or suggestions for other games to check out down in the comments below, and I hope to see you there. See ya!